going to start with our conversations on CARICOM, and it's wonderful to have David Comissiong, Barbados Ambassador to CARICOM, back with us. This morning, he brings us Miniabiyi Ford, who is Executive Director at the Mignon Inniss-Ford Foundation. And some years ago, the ambassador shared this book with me, The Pan-African Love Story of Arnold and Mignon Ford. Now, this lady is the granddaughter of these two people who first immigrated from Barbados to the US and then moved to Ethiopia. And she grew up with these Barbadian grandparents. So she joins us this morning to talk a little bit about it. First came to Barbados back in 2007, so definitely has been around. But good morning, good to have both of you with us.
Good morning, thank you for having us.
Absolutely, and welcome. I'm going to start with you, Ambassador. Welcome back home. I know you've been doing quite a bit of travel. Yes.
Fortunately, I'm here now.
Yes, you are. So talk to us a little bit about, first of all, the writing of this book.
Yes, well, this book was a product of the first COVID lockdown. This is how I spent the COVID lockdown, writing this book, because I had met Miniabiyi's father, Arnold, and Mignon's son, many years ago, and I had promised him at the time that I would write the story of his parents' lives. These two great Barbadian heroes who repatriated to the African continent, to Ethiopia. And I only got the opportunity during that COVID lockdown. But this story is so important for CARICOM, but even more specifically for Barbados, because Barbadians need to know, right, that, right now we are pursuing a relationship with Africa. So we have established an embassy in Ghana, one in Kenya, a consulate in Rwanda. We have the Afri-Exim Bank here in Barbados, CARICOM and the African Union meeting and so forth. But we need to know that Barbados has a very serious back to Africa heritage, going all back to the time of the Bussa Rebellion, when after they executed so many of the rebels, they deported close to 100 and sent them ultimately to Sierra Leone. So the Barbadians went back to Sierra Leone, became a very important part of the population of Sierra Leone. And then we had the Rio Pongas mission in the 1850s, where through Codrington College, many black Barbadians went back to Guinea. And then in 1865, we had the Liberia migration, where hundreds of Barbadians went to Liberia. But many of us don't know about the Ethiopia repatriation. And this is where Arnold and Mignon come in, because these two Bajans actually led that movement of repatriation to Ethiopia. So that is the CARICOM and Barbados historical context to the story of Miniabiyi's grandparents.
All right, so you beckon to the huge painting that we have here on the set as you were talking about them leading. Tell us a bit more about this, because I see Beth Benai, Rabbi Arnold Ford. So let's talk a little bit about this painting.
Well, this painting was done by Barbadian artist David Guru McLean, and it shows Arnold in his Harlem days as he was a master musician, and he was also a Jewish rabbi. But I'll let Miniabiyi explain more about
the painting
and those aspects of Arnold.
All right, so again, welcome. And I think that was quite the welcome.
Yes, thank you so much. I'm very honored to be here, and I thank the ambassador for really helping me get here. I'm very excited to come and tell the story about interesting and pioneering Barbadians that were instrumental in helping modernize education in Ethiopia. Initially, of course, they were here and they migrated to Harlem. Both my grandparents were born here. Once they arrived in the United States, they were very active in different aspects. With the UNIA, my grandfather participated along with Marcus Garvey He was the musical director for the UNIA, as well as he also founded the Bene Bet Abraham Synagogue, and he had a group of mostly Caribbean members, as well as he was also a composer and a poet. His main mission was really to continue the connection of the Pan-African identity. During the various UNIA convention, His Majesty from Ethiopia sent a delegation to ask for assistance in help modernizing Ethiopia. At that time, as many people may know, there was a lot of Back to Africa movement, and the UNIA, having over 8 million members, was very active in all aspects of organizing. And many people were getting ready to go to Liberia. But my grandfather, being a rabbi and meeting with an Ethiopian Jew to invite him to come help, they decided to go to Ethiopia. And that was the initiation of them coming to Ethiopia to be part of the modernization. So my grandparents met in Harlem. My grandmother was his musical student. She taught her music. He came first to Ethiopia in 1930 with a delegation. And later on, my grandmother joined him. They married there, and they had my father and my uncle. And soon after, the Italians were coming and invading, and my grandfather was in ill health. And before he passed away, he asked my grandmother not to leave Ethiopia. And she gave him her word. She would live as Ethiopian and die as an Ethiopian. And she remained, and he soon passed. As a true Bajan woman with 2 little boys, she had to find employment, and also to visualize. She was also invited from another delegation to come help with education. It was more a voluntary help, and she felt very good about it. It was like coming back home to her. So she had to come up with many ingenious ways to survive, because the Italians were coming in, massacring the local population in Addis Ababa. And she participated in the freedom struggle by having people meet in her place and writing papers. She was arrested and, really beaten up, but she came through. Later on, she wanted to teach. There was an attempt for her to teach at a new school, but soon she realized she would be working under a European boss, and she didn't want that. After that, she opened the first co-educational school, and she named it Beta Uriel, House of Light. Along with 2 of her partners from the Caribbean, she started the long journey of modernizing Ethiopian education. At that time, girls were not educated, with boys mostly not even educated. This is in 1940. So she opened the first co-educational school in 1941, and she introduced all aspects of modern education, Boy Scout, Girl Scout, gymnastics, all that she did. So this is part of the story I wanted to tell on her part. My grandfather also was instrumental in designing the red, green, and black flag about the black liberation of freedom, feeling the need to have an identity of our own. Not against, but for us, because we are important. A lot of people see that as against. No, it's more like we matter to ourselves, we come first.
All right, so that's a wonderful story, and of course it's all shared within the pages of this book that you've written.
Yes.
So very interesting stuff. You brought us some photographs as well.
This is my grandfather.
This is your grandfather.
Arnold Josiah Ford.
Arnold Josiah Ford.
Or as Rabbi Ford.
Rabbi Ford.
Yes.
Here he is.
And when you see him here, he's with his big standing bass. And what is so remarkable is that this man, who was born in Barbados in that dark colonial period, 1877, his parents were able to get him lessons in violin, harp, and the standing bass.
Wow.
So he became a master musician. He actually played a very important part in the Harlem Renaissance in developing black music in New York. And he's at the very foundation of the development of jazz, of the development of black concert music. And But his most famous musical accomplishment is as the musical director of Marcus Garvey's Universal Negro Improvement Association, that stirring anthem, the Universal Ethiopian Anthem. You remember a couple of years ago, I got the Marlon Legal Voice Project to do a recording of it. Ethiopia, thou land of our fathers. Now, back in those dark days when we were all colonies, that was decreed to be the national anthem of all black people. That anthem was sung all over the world. It is perhaps the single most important song in the history of black music.
Wow, and this is a photograph of your
Mignon,
grandmother.
Yes.
Very interesting story from your grandparents. I'm intrigued to find out how your grandmother introduced you to Barbados. Obviously, she would have introduced your dad and your uncle, first of all. But what are some of the things she was saying about her homeland?
Well, my grandmother, already was in Ethiopia, and my father, after I was born, I was with my maternal grandmother, and then I went with my paternal grandmother, Mignon, who became my mother. And she ran the boarding school and the day school, but in the house it was like a West Indian. My diet, my lifestyle, my thinking, especially as a woman, that you can do anything, was entrenched in my brain without really realizing it. She communicated her culture through her deeds, through her work, such that it was already inside us. The curriculum also was Pan-African. She was able to bring all the different ethnicity, all the different nationality in our school under a Pan-African ideal where all of us are one. We work together to uplift our nation. So that's how I learned about being Barbadian. And to me, that's what it meant. It was different than the traditional Ethiopian upbringing, which is more conservative. Whereas growing under my grandmother, I just felt that a woman can do anything. She did everything. She taught gymnastics, she taught piano, she did theater, she wrote a play about Toussaint Olivier when I was a little kid. So I knew about the great things the Caribbean people were accomplishing in Africa. And it was a very good news and news to most Ethiopians because they really have no idea such a faraway place, let alone black people lived.
Could I say that she was like an ambassador, an unofficial ambassador for the Caribbean in Africa? So for example, when and she had a very special relationship with Emperor Haile Selassie. In fact, he helped to sponsor her school. He actually prevailed upon her to change the name of her school and to name it in honor of his young daughter, Princess Zenebe, who died very tragically. So the school became famous for its connection with His Imperial Majesty and the royal family. But she consciously saw herself as an ambassador of Barbados and the Caribbean in Ethiopia. And so, for example, when Emperor Selassie visited the Caribbean in 1966, and more specifically Barbados, she would have been very proud of the fact that her emperor was now visiting Barbados, on the verge of Barbados becoming independent. So she played that role as an unofficial ambassador of Barbados and the Caribbean in Ethiopia for many, many decades.
Wow. On the heels of everything that's happening with the connections that we're now making once again with Africa and so many African nations, really setting up embassies and things of that nature. It's wonderful to be able to share these stories all over again because some of these stories are stories that we didn't even know existed, of Barbadians who immigrated as far back as the 20s and 30s.
Correct.
And helped to really develop the continent in so many ways. And even now we're seeing Liberians coming back to Barbados after having those initial 300 plus Liberians who went to Barbadians who went to Liberia all those years ago. So this
and
is
became
wonderful.
presidents of
I became
Liberia.
presidents of Liberia.
You know, very high officials.
Wonderful stuff.
So it's so important that our young people know this because, especially now that we have become a republic, you know, we have thrown off the last vestiges of European colonial rule. We have taken our full sovereignty into our own hands. We have consolidated our national identity. We are stepping out onto the world stage, particularly with an orientation towards Africa, the African continent. It's important that these stories of Bajans who laid this groundwork, who created this foundation for us so long ago, that we know these stories, that we embrace these heroes, and we use them as a source of inspiration.
All right. Well, I must say thank goodness for COVID, because you said COVID is when you took the time to write this. Always positives in everything we do.
Yeah.
So I really want to thank you for coming in. This painting is stunning. I don't know if we're doing it justice in the way we're showing it on television, but where can people see this? Where can people go to take in this work of art?
Right now, it's at my home. However, in the works is a new auditorium in Queen's Park that will be named after Marcus Garvey. You know, Marcus Garvey visited us in 1937 and spoke in Queen's Park. And I have pledged to our minister with responsibility for culture that once that auditorium is established, this will be donated to that auditorium. So this will be in a public space where the Barbadian people can come and view it as one of their great, one of our great heroes.
Come and take it in. Thank you so much, Ambassador Comissiong, Barbados Ambassador to CARICOM, etc. I have to put the etc. on it. And of course, Miniabiyi Ford, Executive Director of the Mignon Inniss-Ford Foundation. And we definitely want to continue to share, because I can tell that you have so much more to tell us all about your grandparents and what they would have been able to accomplish and how they were able to change what happened in terms of blackness and Caribbean resilience and so on in the
lifting up Ethiopia and lifting up not just education but
Pioneer.
also gender equality, women in Ethiopia.
Certainly
That's the
sounds that way.
contribution Bajans have made.
Absolutely. So again, thank you so much for coming in.
Ethiopia, the land of our fathers, the land where the gods love to be. As storm cloud at night suddenly gathers, our armies come rushing to thee. We must in the fight be victorious.
To you.